All right, I'm going to go ahead and do my intro before I let our amazing panelists talk about this exciting subject. Some of you may be familiar with this article. This came out in 2020 in Inside Higher Ed, wherein it talked about the hottest job in higher education. The hottest job being no less than the instructional designer or learning designer, which it also described the instructional designer as the Sherpas of online learning teams, and saying that, you know, in the days of lockdown with emergency online provision, students wouldn't be happy for academics to just wing it anymore. And this can certainly be seen in the number of job ads that you would see posted in UK higher education. So if you look from 2012 to now, if it peaking at 2021, the number of job posts mentioning learning design has increased 730%. So it's been quite a rise with, you know, a little bit of a current dip. And it's something that people seem to really love to do. So Katie Robbins, when we were doing, I was arranging this event, messaged me and said, I was in higher education as an adjunct for a long time and really loved becoming an instructional designer. People ask me regularly about how to switch over. And this, to many people, is very appealing work. And this is why often, you know, people like me who do it do get asked about it so often, because it seems to combine learning with management, people management, project management, product management, technology, and design. And it might have appealing prospects. So in universities, we have many that are building learning design capacity in-house. OPMs have many new partnerships. Companies many companies are reporting a rise in L&D investment, and recruiters, such as Amy Whitehead, who I'll introduce, do report that the job ads remain steady. So how do you become a learning designer? There's a lot out there, and yet not that much out there. It's sort of hard to tell. So, you know, you have degrees like at UTS Sydney and Birmingham, short courses like the UCL Future Learning Design MOOC, and Philippa Hardman's Learning Science Bootcamp, books like Learning Experience Design and Evidence-Informed Learning Design. But perhaps what would be even better is actually to turn to some of our fine experts to discuss this subject. So we have an amazing panel today. First, we have Sam Brenton. Sam is an author, poet, and director of online education at the University of London. He's also an excellent boss in my experience. Amy Whitehead is a director of Red Stag Recruitment, also ex-consultant for Metaverse, and ex-head of higher ed recruitment at Instinct. Asli Daria is head of learning design at Cambridge Online. As a former L&D manager at Ernst & Young, she crosses both worlds of learning design and higher ed. And she was former also director of learning design at Imperial Business School. Kim Tui is an instructional designer and director of Bella Vista Studios. Kim has done a number of super cool things to make the world of instructional designers / learning designers more visible, including an online series called The Show, where she and Kath Ellis would talk through contestants' ID entries in really like lovely detail. And she also lives in a van, traveling Australia, running her company entirely remotely, living the dream. And next we have Chelsea Pianar, who is the managing director of Nicol Learning, Cape Town, one of the world's fastest growing education networks. Before that, she was the chief academic officer at Hubble Studios. Stuart Nicol is the head of eLearning services at the University of Edinburgh, where Stuart manages a large team developed and highly regarded, where they offer, interestingly, both an ID and an LD service. Sharon Altena is a senior curriculum and learning designer at Queen's University of Technology, Brisbane. She's a PhD candidate at Griffith University and currently undertaking research to explore the role, identity, and work of learning designers in the third space. Last but definitely not least, is Leonie Sloman. I can't see if I couldn't see if her icon had appeared. Is a learning design manager at King's Online, where she manages a large team of IDs, or excuse me, LDs. They used to be IDs and then they became LDs, I think under her shield. And Leonie has an MA in Ed Research and is just one of the few people I know who really knows how to read an educational research article. She's read a lot of them. With that, I'm going to stop sharing and get on to the first question, which is, what do learning designers actually do? Why don't I let, I'm just randomly going to pick someone. I'll let Sam lead on that.
Well, our learning at the University of London, I'm lucky enough to have a big team of different kinds of specialists who produce online degrees with our partners around the Federation. And one of those teams is a team of learning designers. And they do what I'm sure all of you will recognize, which is that they partner with academic subject experts to co-create online modules in a way that enables students, creates the conditions, optimal conditions for student learning. So they're partners in the co-creation of modules. That's very much our approach, and I'm sure the approach of many others here.
Why don't I'll just go to the next person to make it spicy. How about Stuart? How would you describe what learning designers do, or rather the learning design function at the University of Edinburgh?
Yeah, well, I mean, interestingly, I think there's only one post in the whole university that has learning design in the job title, and it's an academic post. But in my team, we don't have learning design. It isn't a job title that we use. We have instructional designers, but and learning technologists. But I'd say that instructional design, learning design is, we have a service to the university, which is a learning design service. And I'd say it kind of comes under what I would expect learning technologists and instructional designers to be able to do. As Sam said, it's about taking time to meaningfully design courses, taking time out to kind of do that. So we do that via facilitated sessions with academic colleagues, and we do that in collaboration with our Institute for Academic Development, so with academic developers. But I think underlying it from our point of view, I mean, this function sits in information services group in the university, but it's because we're a technology-rich university and we expect technology to be in the mix with the teaching that's happening here. And I think that's why learning design is so important. It's to kind of meaningfully design the use of technology into teaching. And I guess that's what I expect of the kind of learning design function that we do.
And I would also encourage the panelists to you can just jump in actually at any time. Feel free to, not wait for my lead, but just to make things interesting on the kind of the ID side. Kim Tui, I'd love to hear you talk about all the things that you do.
Okay, well, I just believe it's about simplifying the complex. And so for me, I'm always looking for patterns, and it's about A, B, how do we get there in the simplest and most effective way? And I think if you think with that mindset, it's very easy to think in higher ed, in adult education, in child education, when you're trying to teach coffee skills, teach driving skills. That can become very overwhelming when you get all that context. So just think about, I am problem solving, come from a mindset of curiosity to get someone from A to B. That's what I would encourage. I'll also just shout out, we actually did a vlog for 3 weeks on our YouTube to show behind the scenes of our 3-person learning and development instructional design team and the projects and how we go about that. So if you want to kind of see some snippets of that, that's also a day in the life.
Nice. Yeah, again, any of you feel free to jump in, but I'm just going to randomly pick someone. Osley, you are a person that, you know, again, like bridges both the ID and LD worlds. How would you describe?
I agree with what Kim said, and because I worked in a lot of different learning design contexts, but currently the team I manage purely focus on learning design. And I guess when I think about what they do, you know, they bridge the gap, they map, they streamline, they guide. They build shelves in a library so that things can be structured in a logical way. So it's basically one of our academics recently actually gave feedback, and it was hit the nail on the head in a way. Said that thank you for figuring out how to best communicate complex ideas to people so that they can implement what they learned in their unique context. And that's what a learning designer, this is it's a great testament to what a learning designer does in terms of a pedagogical value they add to the process, because they're not subject matter experts, but they work with the subject matter expert and learn a lot of weird stuff along the way. But they take their ideas and they streamline it. They write an experience, they write a journey, they write a story. So there's a lot of stuff involved. In some cases, I worked in the past as well, people who do learning design and development. So again, you might be a learning designer who also do the development side of things, built on platform. So yeah, it can, depending on the context you're in, it can pretty much be quite different. And as your slide mentioned, Leonard, earlier on, that there's an insane amount of stakeholder management involved, because you're working with some very busy academics, and they're used to one way of teaching. So getting them to actually change their behavior and manage their expectations and guide them through all this is quite an ask.
Amazing. Again, just picking randomly, Sharon, what in your experience do learning designers do?
Well, I guess from my perspective, I think it's very variable. So, you know, here in Australia, the role of a learning designer, and I'm predominantly speaking in terms of the university sector, it's very diverse, and it is dependent on, you know, in terms of the education, where you actually sit. So, you know, whether you're part of vocational education or whether you're university or a private or corporate, part of that corporate sector, or also the OPM, and even different types of our institutions, whether you're a regional or a city-based campus, whether you're part of the group of 8, I think you might have a Russell group in the UK, or a technology institution. We also have some multi-sector institutions here, so that combine the vocational and the higher ed. So again, it's very dependent, and also it depends on whether you're part of a central learning and teaching unit or whether you're employed directly by a faculty. So a lot of what we do, you know, we might be working with an academic or a subject matter expert, as people have talked about already, to design and build a course. But then we might be working with an academic or group of academics to address a particular problem, such as a lack of student engagement, or implementing a flipped learning approach, or assessment and rubric design, and providing the best advice on what sort of technology to use in a particular situation. We could be working with course teams to implement a newly designed curriculum and looking at the redesign of the units or subjects that sit within that curriculum. We could be involved in training and developing of training materials related to technology or pedagogy. But again, as other panellists have mentioned, sometimes we might be involved in a project. So my institution is currently implementing a new LMS. So we've got a group of learning designers that are working in that particular space. So, you know, I've been doing a lot of research with some colleagues of mine. So Rebecca Ning from University of Wollongong and Meredith Hines from Melbourne Uni, and looking at the diversity of the role. And it's amazing that, you know, we had 140 people complete a survey for us, and we only had 25% that indicated that they felt that they had role clarity because it's so diverse. We had probably about 49% or around that said that they didn't have role clarity, and there were 26% that was sort of a bit unsure about that. So I think it's variable, but I think that's what makes it an exciting field to be in.
I think that might be a nice segue to Leonie, who I think could say, I guess at least at King's you have two different LD functions or roles.
Yes, I think we've got two different kind of roles just within one institution, and I agree with quite a lot of what Sharon was saying. So I manage the team. We have about 9 who are in a central unit, and we are just concentrated on supporting fully online, occasionally blended courses. So that's quite different from how Stuart was describing supporting the teaching in general to the university. And so in our team, we have a lot of specialized roles, which really narrows down what the learning designer does, which is to kind of, I guess, focus in on the student journey, the sort of sequence of activities and content that are going to meet the academic aims for the module. That we have separate roles who would actually build, who would check language consistency, create graphics, video, and so on, and project managers, and also a separate user experience researcher who will interview students about aspects of their experience. So that's very different from, we have a few embedded in faculty, which would be much more generalist. And one is formally partly learning technologist, and they're going to be using graphic design and video skills themselves, stronger PM skills, working independently. And I think for us, it's a little bit easier to say what a learning designer does practically day to day, because a portion of their time is spent on initial workshops with module leads to try and understand their aims, maybe improve their learning outcomes, discuss what assessment's going to work well online, and plan out a kind of week by week outline of what they're going to do. But a good 60% or so of their time is on, we call it storyboarding, which is much closer support of their content, and actually kind of dealing with the shape of the words, how you divide up what they want to say into logical kind of chunks, be like lessons, paragraphs, and kind of the close attention to the explanations, and thinking about how you get in more interactivity both within and between those lessons. So that gives a sense of the day-to-day a little bit more as well.
And next, we've got Amy and Chelsea left. I'll go with Chelsea. What in the context of noodle learning do learning designers do?
At Noodle Learning, we have a team. We're a team of close to 30 people, the large majority of which are learning designers. We think about learning design at 3 different levels. So we think of junior learning designers, and senior learning designers. What the role that they play along sort of analysis, design, and development is different. So we'll have our more experienced senior learning designers working a lot at what we call the discovery phase. So that's where they're really partnering with, it could be the program director, faculty per course, to really break down the vision for the online program or those individual courses within the program. So really understanding, what do we want this to look like? And what's really important there is often thinking about, how do we ensure that learners, that students get the experience that they're expecting related to the reputation of that particular educational institution in an online environment. So we work with them there. As we then move to actually designing the courses, similar to what Leonie described, we map out the different learning objectives and the activities and content that would support those objectives in a scaffolded way, in a blueprint, and then we move on to development. So typically our junior learning designers and learning designers work more in the development side of things. Our seniors work more in the discovery phase, but it's really a very exciting role because of that diversity. On one hand, it can be a challenge. On the other hand, it's what makes things exciting, because from one course to the next, one program to the next, you're tackling new challenges, coming up with new solutions, working with new people, and learning about new subject matter. So it really is a role that means you're a problem solver, you're a relationship manager, you're an educator in some sense, as you work with subject matter experts and faculty to sort of open their world to what technology can do for enhancing the learning experiences that they also envision. So it's just it's a hugely interesting role.
Lastly, Amy, someone who's, I would imagine, has certainly seen a great spectrum of learning design work. What would you say learning designers do?
Well, just the difference in everyone's answers is a direct reflection of the market in general. So one of the first questions I will ask a client when they ask me for a learning designer is, what kind of learning designer do you want? What is a learning designer to you? And it really does vary. There's no catch-all term still for me in terms of what a learning designer is. Some people might be in the weeds, co-creating with academics, developing a certain degree in a certain faculty, where they have to have perhaps a basic understanding of that topic area, experience in that. It might be that they're in a central online function like King's Online, for instance, where you sort of, forgive me if this is not correct anymore, but I know from the past you sort of feed into a few different departments, so it's a more centralized function. It might be that you sat with the strategic team, the directors of learning, looking at the learning offering institute-wide, looking at the strategy as a whole. What's the learning journey for everyone across the institute? Some that are focused solely on academic development and what are often called champions of online learning, really getting buy-in from academics, which we've still sort of got a long way to go with. So a lot of learning designers still have a huge focus on getting that buy-in and interest and engagement from academics. So to answer your question, there's no one answer I could give you. It just completely depends on the context of that particular role, the setup of that team. And I think a couple of people have said that in the comments as well. It just so completely depends on that particular department and how it's sort of structured.
Yeah, and I mean, you've also seen growth in areas outside HE too, I think, yeah. Haven't you?
Yeah, so I worked for about 10 months on a project with Multiverse, and off the back of that, I've worked with a lot of other tech apprenticeships. And their version of a learning designer is quite different, and it's been a real learning curve for me. It's been a case of having to build almost a new talent pool entirely. And these are very data-orientated commercial learning designers. So these people are looking at, how can we track data? How can we implement data tools? How can we work with data scientists to get us from commercial point A to commercial point B? So these are really sort of commercial people that are understanding, what are those end goals and how can we get there? How can we, a lot of it is around project management. How can we work to tight budget constraints? how can we work in a very high growth, sort of unclear environment? How can we navigate ambiguity? So it's quite interesting to see the difference in requirements for a learning designer in that field versus more traditional roles in HE. But interestingly, because a lot more of these EdTech sort of boot camps are coming up, it's inspiring the HE sector to sort of adopt those approaches as well. And a lot of institutes now develop their own apprenticeships and boot camps. So I'm seeing a bit more of a sort of crossover in types of profiles as well. So yeah, that's been quite an interesting development over the past couple of years, definitely.
Amazing. Which leads us nicely to our next question, which is, as things get increasingly juicier, which is, what kind of skills does a learning designer need? I'd love to, if Leonie, you feel up for the challenge of leading on that question, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, and this is actually something, well, I've also asked my team what they enjoy about the role from time to time. And I think one of the things that appeals about it is the kind of breadth of skills that you can bring to the table. And typically it's a balance of soft skills and hard skills. A lot of empathy is really important, both for learners and academics. So you've got to be collaborative and a good communicator. People tend to also have a natural curiosity and can handle some for us, we're working on master's programs, can be very challenging material as well, and then translate that by a mixture of being analytical, logical, and also supposed to be creative. It also helps if they're quite organized. There's a pragmatic side to what can you do. A bit of deadline commercial awareness is very helpful. I'm talking about qualities rather than actual skills though, aren't I? I think often when it comes down certainly to hiring, there's three things that I'm particularly looking for because they're a little bit harder to learn on the job. I mean, some aspects, there's areas of knowledge around accessibility, inclusion, and copyright, which I think can be taught. Certainly particular software and storyboarding approaches can be taught. The things that I would hope people will bring is firstly some kind of understanding of effective learning at a theoretical level. And we also usually have some kind of task to get people to apply that and show that you can present complex ideas clearly and creatively. It's crucial that I can trust people to build a good relationship with our academics. And there's that balance of, are they going to listen to and respect their needs and aims? And are they also able to influence and stand up for the value of their own suggestions? And finally, particularly, I'm looking for people who are going to be happy in our environment, and particularly those who are happy to collaborate rather than, as we've said, the role can differ. If you're actually happy at owning the whole process yourself and doing all aspects of it, you're not going to be so happy. We're particularly collaborative and very busy. So that's what I'm looking for.
Next, I'd love, Kim, you've seen a lot of work, with the work you've done with the show and giving people feedback. What do you think a good learning designer, instructional designer needs? What kind of skills do they need?
First of all, I'd get into the job for the right reasons, and I'd follow your heart and not come from a place of fear. So I'd really question, if you're going to pursue a degree or whatever it is, make sure you get into it for the right reasons. And I think like the curiosity and the learning, like that really, really helps. If you love learning, this is great because you're always working on something new, solving new problems every single day. And it's an ever-changing field, and it's ever evolving, and it's becoming more and more important to the world. Now, the value of what we do is not appreciated yet by corporates, higher ed, or anything like that. But if you think about 10, 20 years, they're really going to get it. So in terms of things that I'm learning, my team are learning, and that I encourage you to jump on and learn is psychology, change management, marketing, branding, sales, Behavior economics is another very, very good one. So if you're learning that, you're starting to see the patterns, the trends, the lingo, the language, the skills, that they're actually all problem solving things, which means then that we can solve any problem. And I think like when you're trying to get into the industry, you're learning, right? And you're going to have great things, and your mindset is going to stop you from pursuing or getting that job. And what I'd say to you is, don't, just because something says you need to have this amount of experience, just go for it. I didn't have the experience and I went for it. I'm self-taught. I run a business. I have global clients. Our projects are hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes. I live in a van. So create your reality. When it comes from the heart, it is a great place, and you can do it if you set your mind to it. You will work it out. And in terms of going for those jobs, tips in terms of that, you have the skills, you have the knowledge. It's about the ability to communicate it, because otherwise you're probably wasting your time learning, like you haven't had an effective learning situation. But it's about the STAR response: situation, task, action, result that you got. We don't have all of the problems or the projects or the learning or the master's degrees or whatever it is that we've created in our portfolio, but they are out there, and I know what I can do for someone. So I look at things on Google that are like, that's the thing that will help you change behavior, move the needle, get return on investment, whatever it is. Get the stuff from Google and talk to what you know and how you can paint the picture and show what is possible for the client, for the recruiter, whatever it is. There was one other thing I was going to say on that. Oh yeah, portfolios. People get hung up on that sort of stuff and demonstrating their skills. I would just say to you, if you can demonstrate and show visually, because people taste with their eyes, what you can do for a client, for a colleague, for a new boss, for a stakeholder internally, whoever it is, if you can show that within 7 seconds or less, because first impressions are made like that, and people will reverse engineer your work anyway that quickly, you'll be fine.
Yeah, amazing. I'm not a panelist, I'm moderating, but just to add, I recently had the privilege of having a coffee with Matt Ash, who is the who I know knows you, Kim, and he was the former head of learning design at MediaZoo, which is a very award-winning L&D or like learning design agency, and I was just trying to sort of figure out what this guy is about. And I think the one thing that kind of struck me about him and his illustrious career is like, this is a guy that just reads everything, like he's interested in everything. Like, he just goes wild, and like, there's like a book, it's like, looks like it might help, he'll read it, he'll just like get right in there. And I think that's probably one key part of the secret of his success. Stuart, would jump to Stuart. Stuart, what in your experience makes a good learning designer? What skills do they need?
So yeah, like I said before, we don't normally recruit specifically for learning designers. We usually recruit for learning technologists, and learning design is something that we would expect learning technologists to do. But whatever you call them, I think the name's less important. But I think communication skills, like a couple of other people have said already, are key. And also the ability to be able to present and facilitate sessions. Facilitation skills are really important, because doing that kind of engagement with academic colleagues, we're kind of usually facilitating kind of half-day to 2-day sessions with them, which is a skill in itself. And it's something that we kind of help people develop here by bringing people in to develop facilitation skills. I think we're always looking for somebody, with an appreciation of the interplay of teaching and technology as well. So the evidence of ability in both of those areas. For us in Edinburgh, in a way, we normally looking for somebody with experience in the HE sector, because there's an appreciation of the context into which you're designing. And I suppose one thing that's really important, I think, is to have had the experience of being a student in that technology-rich environment. Like, we encourage people here to take online courses as part of their professional development, because you start to get an appreciation of the emotions that you feel as an online student. And I think that's really, really important when you're designing into those courses. And I suppose one other thing that kind of I've noticed over the past couple of years is we seem to be employing more people that have teaching qualifications. So although I've just said we look for people with HE experience, we've employed quite a few primary and secondary school teachers who during the pandemic got a real taste for technology in teaching, and have started to kind of come out of that profession and look more into the learning technology, instructional design, learning design kind of profession, which is quite an interesting trend that we've noticed.
It's great. Chelsea, what in your experience are the skills that a good learning designer needs?
I think I can build on what Kim and Stuart have shared, and I guess starting with Kim saying that you probably already have a lot of the skills that you would need to become a learning designer. And in fact, one of the first things that we do as we onboard new learning designers, and much like Stuart has just said, we often look for people who have a solid grounding within education. So they may be educators, ex-teachers, lecturers. And that's almost the more important part. The technical skills like storyboarding, learning how to use authoring tools, we can teach all of that. So one of the first things that we do as we onboard new learning designers is to make them feel confident and comfortable in their new role. And so we do an activity where we actually ask them to, if they haven't done an online course before, to choose one, any one that interests them. It can be about anything, so that they have the experience and the perspective, both as the teacher, lecturer, educator, but also as the student in an online environment. And they can critically evaluate that experience. What made them motivated or engaged, or where were they lost in that experience? The other thing that we ask them to do is to reflect on some of the soft skills and technical skills that already will make them great learning designers. So they actually do a reflection where they have a look at their experience, pull out, extract those qualities, skills, knowledge areas that would help them to be a great learning designer. And that often helps them to build their confidence. So really it can be anyone. And then, yes, we do, in terms of technical skills, if you did, reading everything is great advice, because you are, as a learning designer, you are a consultant and an advisor. You're also a relationship manager. You're also a problem solver. You're a curator. So the more tools you can have in your toolkit, the more creative you can be in developing the right solutions for the right programs and courses. So be curious, and if there is something you could do to prepare, explore some of the more popular authoring tools like Articulate 360, Rise and Storyline, get a basic understanding for some of the learning sciences, like thinking about Merrill's principles, the ADDIE model, Bloom's revised taxonomy. Just get an understanding for what those things mean at a basic level. Whether you agree with them or not is not important. You just need to be able to talk about them and have those in your toolkit. So I guess the short answer is that we recruit for people who are excited about online education. I like somebody said in the chats, they said that it's human-centered, and that's absolutely it. Our learning designers are people who care about people. They care about the teams that they work with, because they're working with project managers, learning technologists, faculty and SMEs. They need to care about the learner or the student and what they're getting out of it at the end of the day. And so really, in every way, it's human-centered. And that is almost the most important thing above everything else.
Sam, what in your experience, what skills do good learning designers need?
I echo a lot of the things that colleagues have said on this panel, certainly in terms of the qualities needed. If you have those qualities, then you can learn the skills. And actually, arriving into a role only kind of half formed is probably appropriate for this, because this is a field that's changing all the time. Curiosity, I think, is the number one for me. If someone's curious, it can take them a long way. It is a communication role because it's a people role. When a learning designer partners with an academic subject expert to create a piece of learning, it's actually a very close and creative relationship. You're making something together. It involves a lot of trust both ways. Because you're asking an expert in their subject domain to open up about the way they think about teaching, to admit what they don't know. And you're also asking them to teach you some of what they know so that you can help them do what they need to do better. And that's actually a very intimate and creative relationship when it works. And it takes a whole host of human skills to be able to kind of achieve that, manage it, and then make it practical with outputs at the end. So I think curiosity about the subject area that you're encountering is vital. Being able to learn the language of different disciplines and different pedagogic traditions within different disciplines is vital. And I think being open-minded about what works in learning is absolutely crucial. The internet's been with us for about a generation now. We've been doing this for a generation. We're still in the very early days. How to learn effectively online, or how to design for effective learning online, is a very early subject fit domain still. It's not a settled question. So the very worst thing I think that people can bring to it is certainty, and probably the very best thing that people can bring to it is an open-mindedness.
That's great. Ostley, what in your experience do good learning designers, what skills do they have?
Firstly, the chat is insane, so thank you. This is great to follow.
Yeah, the chat. Thanks for saying that. Is amazing quality of discussion on the chat.
Yeah, so thank you for being very engaged, I guess, to begin with. Everything what everybody said, but I think for me it depends on what you need, who you need, because at times you might need someone very specific with very specific skill set, and at times you can be a bit more relaxed about it and say, we'll teach you. And I think perhaps a lot of experience in the higher education, in the virtual room, so to speak, and learning design roles in those settings seems to be a lot more specialized, so to speak. Whereas if you're looking at a corporate learning design role, you're probably looking at a more broad strokes of ability that is being required. And I was reflecting on, because I ended up writing a few job descriptions recently, and you need to think about the skills you require. So I sort of separated into technical skills and the interpersonal skills perhaps. And what's being mentioned about, know your theories, learning theories, know the research, know their uses and also their limitations, so you're not blindly bound or wedded to one school of thought. Also know the tech you're going to be designing for, because you may not be able to build on it, but you need to know enough of its advantages and its limitations so you can design around it. And in terms of the personal skills, yes, everything that's been said about the curiosity, ability to ask better questions, creative problem solving, attention to detail, I'm going to bring that in there. I think for me, maybe this would apply to any job, but know what you bring to the table, because we all have our unique skills and strengths that we come with. And know how you can bring that onto the team that you're going to be joining, and the team that you're going to be working in, and the people you're going to be working with. And I think that is often again, going back to authenticity and not hiring people that are in the same box over and over again. But I like to think I'm very blessed with a team of very different individuals. They all have different strengths and they complement each other greatly. And on the note of there's a lot of teachers turning into the learning design profession, and I suppose there are plenty of examples of that in higher education, but in the private sector it's slightly different. In corporate sectors, it can be from anywhere, but that's not to single out. I mean, I thought about my team's previous lives, so to speak, and I do have a few teachers, yes, but I also have a corporate trainer, I have an engineer, and I didn't know this until recently, an accountant. So that, you know, I'm a business graduate myself, so it can come from anywhere. So don't, you know, if you're not a teacher and you want to get into it, don't be disheartened by it.
Brilliant. Sharon, you've actually done some research, not just into the skills that learning designers need, but the skills that I think that they need to get more of a seat at the table to progress the profession.
Yes, so we're sort of starting to do some research in that particular area, and I think that this is one of the difficult things that we face as learning designers, is getting having a voice and being able to have a seat at the table within our institutions. And I think that, you know, having worked at a couple of institutions, but also, you know, with different managers and things like that, I think it's the way in which we might be able to get a seat at the table is in some ways dependent on our organisation and the leader of our unit. So, and I think it depends on whether the unit that you work for is seen as a leader in learning and teaching for an institution. And I think it's a lot easier if that is the case to get a seat at the table, because the decision makers understand your role and they want to seek your expertise, and it's easier to get invitations to have a seat at the table. I think that in some other universities it's seen as more of a service role, and that can be a little bit more difficult because typically academics and maybe faculty, assistant deans of teaching and learning might have those seats at the table, and the work of the learning designer is seen as more of that supporting role of whatever initiatives that they actually come up with. I do think also that, you know, if your leadership within your unit is proactive, then they actually will use and leverage their position when they hear about initiatives to say, oh, we need to bring a learning designer in here, or a learning designer could come into this conversation, and that sort of thing. And quite often will proactively seek opportunities for learning designers in that space. I think that for me, one of the big things is about learning designers having a voice. And there's, you know, other people have already, you know, talked about third space workers, that we're sort of that invisible group of people within institutions. So I think it's looking at opportunities where we can, as uncomfortable as it might be, look at some self-promotion of the value that we bring, and making it known what our interests are and that sort of thing, so that when other people are thinking about, you know, that you might be interested in academic integrity or something like that, that they'll go, oh, I remember somebody was interested in that, and that quite often will get you there. I think also volunteering for things. So if something comes up to be on a project or something like that, to take up those opportunities, and it helps you to build your network. We've also done a little piece of research that we're hoping to get published, which is about learning designers and their use of Twitter. And I think that, you know, one of the things that it's really shown me is that, you know, we have a lot of lessons to learn from our academic colleagues in terms of joining in that conversation around teaching and learning in a broader audience. You know, and I take my hat off, you know, Neil Mosley and, you know, Colin Simpson as well, that I look at the way that they operate as learning designers, you know, in those platforms and contribute to the conversation, I think is fantastic. And I think we need to probably, you know, be brave and step out there and do that. I think a lot of what we do as learning designers is that we need to be able to influence up. So those are important skills. And I know earlier you talked about the different capabilities of learning designers and skills that they need. And I think that there are, you know, I agree absolutely, you know, around a lot of those soft skills, but I think it is about a learning designer being able to lead and in The Art of Possibility by Ben Zander, he actually talks about leading from any chair. So you don't need a position to be able to lead. So I think that's just a couple of things there.
Yeah, I have to check out that book. I've not heard of it before. It sounds great. I've got time to ask Amy about what skills you would look for in a learning designer, and then we have time for a rapid fire question. Then we might have time for question after that, although I think we might not. So Amy, what skills does a good learning designer need?
Again, like I said before, it completely depends. There's a lot of variables, depends on the role, the team, but a common characteristic that my clients will look for is someone who is influential without rustling feathers. I know there's still a lot of institutes that I work with who have very long-standing academics who are still very nervous and sometimes even reluctant to adapt to learning technology. I think there is still a lack of confidence and a long way to go there. So as a learning designer, I'm quite often tasked with finding someone who can really influence using intelligent methods, workshops, one-to-ones, to really gain that trust and understanding, not by being a bull in a china shop and saying, this is how it's going to be now, but someone who can delicately influence those more nervous academics and really get them to buy in themselves and not just follow because they've been instructed to, and really get that engagement. So that's definitely one of the first characteristics hiring managers will always ask me for. One interesting development I'm seeing is people want to see impact. So as the sector is exponentially growing and it's becoming ever more buoyant and more institutes have more ambitions and goals that they want to achieve, they want people with that growth mindset. Often a learning designer sits amongst the strategic team and gets to look at that kind of bird's eye view and how we can progress our learning offering. So it's someone who's got demonstrable experience of making an impact in an institute and ideally providing data to evidence that. And that's definitely a characteristic that is pretty much asked by a lot of hiring managers nowadays. You know, what has that person achieved, but what's the statistics on that, whether that's the increased academic engagement. Okay, great. What did that look like? What are the stats? How did they track that progress? So it's kind of a hybrid of someone that's made an impact, but someone who's naturally data orientated and likes to physically see in black and white what they've progressed, how they've progressed and how they've succeeded. So again, stepping into that more sort of commercial type mindset is trickling across HE quite rapidly, actually.
That's brilliant. Okay, we have time for a quick rapid fire bit of advice from all the panelists. If there was one resource, article, video, course that you would recommend for people who want to get started in learning design, what would it be? I'll start with you, Amy. What?
Well, as someone that's actually looking to move into learning design as part of one of my service offerings, I'm currently exploring the diploma in digital learning design with the Digital Learning Institute. It seems to have a lot of good feedback, and it teaches someone like me who's not a former academic, who doesn't have that grounding, everything from stage one and the entire learning design journey. So for one sort of catch-all course, that's what I would recommend.
Brilliant. Okay, we got 2 minutes left. Sharon, what would you recommend?
So I would recommend, there's a book called The Accidental Instructional Designer by Cami Bean. So it's second edition has just been published. So that would be one. The other thing I can say, a second thing, which is there is an ID to ID peer mentoring program that's done through Educause and Penn State. And it's a free program, but they match you with a mentor. And if you know, it's worth considering being a mentor or a mentee, and that covers Canada, US, South Africa, Asia, Middle East. You'll get an international experience.
Wow, hadn't heard of that. That's great. Chelsea, what would you recommend?
She was mentioned right at the start of the session, but Dr. Philippa Hardman, she's got a blog or a newsletter as well as a podcast, and her themes are very topical. And I mean, it's something we need to do as learning designers, is kind of future-proof ourselves and stay abreast of innovations in the field. So a lot of interesting information there. And then once you're feeling quite confident that you are wanting to move into learning design, if you do want to upskill on technical skills, there are a lot of free tutorials available online through, for example, Articulate 360. And you can sort of start to learn some of those technical skills without a price tag attached.
Amazing. We've got 1 minute left, probably not going to make it in time. Leonie, what would you recommend?
I see Asley's already recommended it, but I also agree for general Julie Dirkson's How to Be a Learning Designer. If you're interested particularly in higher education, though, I would add Defink Significant Learning, which I think helps with that different context.
Yeah, shout out to Mira Vogel. Sam, what would you recommend?
Oh, I put a link to a blog in the chat, which is the 3-Star Learning Experiences blog, which is Miriam, I'm not sure how to pronounce her first name, excuse me, Neelan and Paul Kirshner. And that's a really good read, partly because it's a great kind of cognitivist counterpoint to the kind of constructivist consensus that you get at the moment. So I think for that breadth of knowledge of approaches to learning, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Asley, what would you recommend?
I wrote my recommendation on the chat, actually. Julie Dirkson's book, definitely. Nick Shackleton-Jones, How People Learn, as well. It's a good book. And just like join networks. There are a lot of learning networks out there, and you meet wonderful people, and that's what I did. Yeah, that's where you learn a lot as well, from listening to the conversations in the networks and in happenings like this.
That's great. And lastly, Kim, what would you recommend?
2 things. Kathy Moore Action Mapping blog. Just Google it. It's amazing. You will use it every single day as a learning designer ID. The second thing has to be our YouTube, Bella Vista Studios, because there's case studies, there's role plays. Every single thing that I do in my studio with my team, with my clients on every project is on YouTube for free.
Yeah,
and
I
also,
second that.
It's a privilege to be here, so thank you.
Oh, well, yeah, it's a privilege to have you here, and I'm glad you mentioned it. Everybody should check out Kim's YouTube. I don't know how you do it. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the great comments, and thank you for being such great panelists. And I'm really grateful that we can all talk and about this really important subject. So yeah, thank you very much. I'm gonna close things up, and I'm really sorry we didn't have time for questions. I didn't make it through my own questions, so yeah, thanks Nil, and please come to RIDE, to the RIDE conference if you can make it. It's going to be awesome. So, all right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.